Hi, and welcome to the Custom Model Guy and the Revell Ford Mustang Boss 302 build series. We showed the unboxing of this model a few days ago and now we're beginning the build itself. We'll be starting out with the engine, as I'll be doing this in order laid out in the instructions. Began with snipping the main engine block out from the sprue, and then I sanded down the rough tab marks. Gluing these parts together, because they're not painted, I used Revell contact adhesive, which isn't strictly a glue but it's more a solvent which actually melts the plastic a little bit and bonds the pieces together. You only need a little, otherwise it will press out the sides and require sanding off when completely dry. Once that was dry, I sanded off the joins just to smooth them out a little bit and remove any excess glue. And then I buffed this with a fine grit just to remove any rough sand marks that might show up underneath the paint. I'm assembling here the one piece of the engine which is all in flat aluminium, and I'll spray that up as one piece. There are other pieces to the engine which are in gunmetal and some blue and black, and I'll be colouring those separately for assembly later. This is cutting out the bottom of the gearbox. Quick bit of cleaning up. And then glued to the bottom of the gearbox. And here I'm just cutting out the other parts of the engine and giving them a quick sand as I go, just to remove the sprue tabs from each part. Okay, so that's the engine block assembled, and now I'm just going to give this a spray with the airbrush with the flat aluminium. I use a Harder & Steinbeck Silverline Evolution with a 4mm nozzle, and I'm using Tamiya flat aluminium. I just went lightly to start with because I haven't done any primer on this, just a light coat to start with. And then as I'm rolling it around, I'm just getting more and more coverage as I go. I'm just cutting out some more of the engine block sections. I think that is the two engine heads. and the valve covers. And again, just give them a quick clean up to remove the sprue tabs. Using some Vallejo blue, Arctic blue, and this is for the valve covers. Very small parts, so I only need a few drops. Again, I've not bothered with any primer on these parts because they're so small, and they're going to be inside the bonnet area, so they're not in an area where they're going to get knocked or scratched or anything like that. For areas like bumpers and anything on the externals that are liable to get any scratches, then I would do some primer. I had a problem with the paint wasn't flowing, it kept coming in spurts. And then moving on to the cylinder heads, which are in gunmetal. Having problems with flow. I think my airbrush needs a good strip down and clean. Not sure what that part is called. I'm going to call it a cowl. And this is the oil pan underneath, which is in a semi-gloss black, again from the Tamiya range. Okay, so with all the pieces painted and now dry, we move on to the actual assembly of the engine. I put a small dab of super glue on some tape. And use a cocktail stick. Being careful not to rest my hand on the glue, which I have done before. Stuck my hand to the desk. This particular glue is CA glue, and it's very thin and has a 4-second contact adhesion time, which means you have to work very, very quickly with it, and once it's dry, it's never going to come apart. Now fitting the valve covers. It was around this point that I realised that I actually had the engine heads round the wrong way, so it wasn't lining up properly, and later on the timing chain case doesn't fit properly and it overhangs. I'm yet to see whether that's going to cause me any other problems, but for now it's only a very slight problem, and doesn't really show unless you really know what you're looking for. So if you notice, the side to the gearbox is actually flatter than the side at the rear. So with all those parts together, I moved on to the exhaust headers. These were particularly fiddly. They're very small. These need to be painted in gunmetal as well. There were 2 parts to each side, so I glued the parts together before painting them. Sanding off very carefully. Gluing the 2 pieces together, which was very fiddly, trying to hold it all together in the right place and glue it at the same time. Again, using the Revell contact adhesive here, simply because it's got the needle, which makes it very easy for gluing these sorts of things. Side. Painting these parts, I decided to paint them half first, on painting the side which is connected to the engine head. I'll then glue it and then paint the other half. This was the easiest way I found to paint fiddly little parts like this. Paint the section which is going to be glued on, and then paint the part that's sticking out afterwards. And now moved on to the final parts of the engine, which is the that looks like a timing case, and the pulleys, alternator, distributor, and oil filter. And starter motor. I started by giving them a quick buffing up just to clean the edges up. Timing case, this needed to be in a gloss black, so I decided to hand paint this. I've speeded this video up because it did take a while. Painted the pulley wheels. These were done in a flat black, the Revell flat black, and then later on they needed the actual pulley wheels themselves to be painted in a semi-gloss black. For the semi-gloss I'm using Tamiya. The Revell paints are actually meant for airbrushing, but I find that they are excellent for hand brushing as well, particularly the chrome and the blacks. The timing case just needed a little bit more just to cover up the white. And here I'm just applying the semi-gloss black to the pulley wheels. This is the oil filter. Starter motor, again I used a part painting technique. It was very fiddly to get those little bits into the engine, so I painted the engine side piece first. That's painting the distributor, which is again in gunmetal. I've sped all these videos up because they're just so boring to watch otherwise. That's the distributor, that's the alternator. That's fitting the starter motor, which was extremely fiddly due to its location. And then gluing of the timing case. Sorry it's off screen, I keep forgetting to hold things in the middle. And this is when it became very apparent that I had the engine heads, the cylinder heads around the wrong way, and as you can see there's just a slight area next to the timing covers where on the left hand side where it's just not quite seating right. But because it's glued with the CA glue, I've got no hope in removing those and correcting it, so I just have to leave it as it is. gluing of the timing pulleys. And the gluing of the exhaust headers. Again, using the 4-second CA glue, so you really don't have a lot of time to maneuver the part into the right place. You really have to get it right first shot. And you can see the part that I've yet to paint. This side was particularly difficult to get in place due to the starter motor I didn't quite position correctly. It's just a couple of millimeters out, which meant that the headers didn't quite sit right. You can see there how quickly that glue went off. This is the painting of the remaining part of the exhaust headers. Again, I've sped all this up for you. Now, I didn't like the way the engine was looking, it was too clean, so I used some Tongue 502 engine grease, thinned down with some oil paint thinners. Which I then brushed this on, and it just makes the engine look less brand new. And then once I've gone over with the thin, I then dab in some thicker stuff into the grooves and the joints, just to improve the look. And then once it's done that, I then go over with a cotton bud and I just remove most of it. So you're just left with this sheen, and it gets into all the nooks and crannies. It just makes the engine, all the details in the engine stick out a bit more, makes everything pop a bit, and just makes it a little bit look a little bit more real, I think anyway. I'd be open to any comments or suggestions on what everybody else thinks of this. See me dabbing the thicker stuff into the grooves, and now I'm just removing excess with the cotton bud. I slowed the video back down at this point so you can actually see how it was developing. And that's it for the engine build. Here's some final photos of what it looks like. I hope this was enjoyable for you. Any comments, suggestions? Is the video too long? Is it too short? Do I talk too quickly? Do I sound too boring? Anything. Please leave any comments that you wish to leave. And thanks for watching.